A Warrensville Heights man convicted of killing his fiancée will serve 24 years to life in prison.
This afternoon, a judge sentenced Terrell Edwards for the death of Amanda Williams. Her daughter was among the family members who spoke before the sentence was read.
I can't never call my mom again and tell her I love her. I can't never call and tell her about my day, about my
News 5's Catherine Ross.
She was a mother, a daughter, a friend, a woman who built a life with her own hands, pouring love into her family and passion into her career. Amanda Williams had worked tirelessly to create a future for herself and her loved ones. She was respected, admired, cherished. But on the night of October 9th, 2023, everything changed. Inside the walls of her Warrensville Heights home, a horrifying act unfolded. A series of gunshots shattered the silence. The man she planned to marry, the man she once trusted, stood over her. Moments later, police arrived to a gruesome scene. Amanda lay unresponsive, her body riddled with bullets. Her life was over, and her killer, her own fiancé, claimed it was self-defense. But was it? This is the story of Amanda Williams. A life cut short, a community in shock, and a trial that would determine whether justice would truly be served. Some say it was an unavoidable tragedy. Others believe it was murder. As we go through the evidence, the testimonies, and the courtroom battle, one question remains: what really happened that night? Before we begin, what are your thoughts on self-defense claims in domestic violence cases? Let us know in the comments. Amanda Williams was more than just a name in the headlines. She was a mother who loved deeply, a daughter who brought pride to her family, and a businesswoman who turned her passion into success. Born and raised in Warrensville Heights, Ohio, she built a reputation as a talented hairstylist, someone who not only made people look their best, but also made them feel their best. Clients didn't just visit her for a haircut. They came for the warm conversations, the genuine laughter, the feeling of comfort that Amanda naturally provided. Her salon became a space of connection, where people from all walks of life felt at home. To many, she was a confidant, the kind of person who listened without judgment and gave advice as if she had lived 100 lives. But above all else, Amanda's greatest joy was being a mother. She worked tirelessly to provide for her daughter, Tyler, making sure she had everything she needed: a good home, a solid education, a mother who was present. For years, Amanda balanced the demands of single motherhood with the challenges of running a business. She didn't have time for distractions. Romance wasn't a priority. She had her daughter, her work, her family. That was enough, or so she thought. Then came Terrell Edwards. At first, it seemed like fate had finally given Amanda the love she deserved. Terrell was charming, attentive. He made her laugh in ways she hadn't in years. Friends and family noticed a difference in her. She smiled more, she seemed lighter. He wasn't just her boyfriend. He was the man she planned to marry. But as the months passed, small cracks began to form beneath the surface. There were whispers, subtle shifts in Amanda's demeanor. She stopped sharing as much about her relationship. The spark in her eyes dimmed just slightly. Some of her closest friends later admitted they sensed something was off but dismissed it. After all, Amanda was strong, independent. If something were wrong, surely she would have said something. Had there been warning signs? Had Amanda seen them but chosen to ignore them? Or had she convinced herself that love, commitment, and patience could smooth over the rough edges of her relationship? Many victims of domestic violence don't recognize the danger until it's too late. Sometimes the signs are there: controlling behavior, sudden bursts of anger, manipulation. But other times, the shift happens so gradually that by the time they realize what's happening, they're already too deep to escape easily. Have you, or someone you know, ever seen red flags in a relationship but ignore them? Let us know in the comments. Amanda met Terrell Edwards during what seemed like a promising chapter of her life. She had built a successful career, raised a wonderful daughter, and was finally allowing herself the chance to focus on love. Terrell came into her life unexpectedly, bringing with him a charm that felt effortless. He knew exactly what to say, how to make her feel special. He showered her with attention, made her laugh, and in the beginning, it felt like she had finally met someone who understood her. Their relationship started off like many do, exciting, full of late-night conversations and stolen moments of joy. Friends and family noticed how happy Amanda seemed. Terrell was always by her side, attentive and engaged. He talked about building a future together, about marriage, about a life where they could grow old with one another. Amanda, who had spent so much of her time focusing on others, finally felt like someone was prioritizing her. But behind the smiles and shared moments, there were things that only Amanda saw. In public, Terrell was affectionate, charismatic, someone who appeared to adore Amanda. But in private, cracks in that perfect image started to appear. Those closest to Amanda would later recall moments when her usual light-hearted energy seemed dimmed, when she became more withdrawn, when she started making excuses for missing social gatherings. It wasn't obvious at first. It never is. There were whispers of arguments, of tension growing beneath the surface. Some who knew them questioned whether Amanda was truly happy. But when asked, she brushed it off. Every couple has disagreements, she would say. It's nothing serious. But was that true? Or was she convincing herself that the issues were temporary, that love and patience could smooth out the rough edges? Terrell had a past, one that only became fully known after it was too late. Court records revealed a history of domestic violence allegations, though none had led to serious legal consequences. Amanda may not have known the full extent of his past when she agreed to share her life with him, but what she did experience in their relationship was enough for her daughter, Tyler, to notice. There were nights when Amanda and Terrell's arguments were louder than they should have been, times when the tension in their home was almost unbearable. Did Amanda ever think about leaving? Did she ever confide in anyone about what was really happening behind closed doors? If she did, those words were never recorded, never reported. What is known is that Amanda stayed. She continued to build a life with Terrell, continued to believe in the relationship, continued to move forward. And then one night everything changed. Do you think people can hide their true nature in relationships for years? Let's discuss in the comments. On the evening of October 9th, 2023, Amanda Williams returned home from a work trip, unaware that this would be the last time she would step through the door of her house alive. She had spent the day in good spirits, looking forward to reconnecting with her fiancé, Terrell Edwards, after some time apart. What was meant to be a peaceful evening in the comfort of her home quickly descended into horror. The couple's argument, which had been brewing for days, escalated rapidly. Neighbors later recalled hearing raised voices and sounds of objects being thrown in the house. Tyler, Amanda's daughter, was at home that night. She had been in her bedroom when the argument began. At first, the shouting was muffled, but as she got closer to the door of her mother's bedroom, the sound of gunshots rang out. The noise was unmistakable, and it immediately sent a wave of fear through her. Terrified, Tyler rushed toward the bedroom, desperate to reach her mother, but Terrell was standing in the doorway, blocking her way. He would later prevent her from entering the room altogether, locking her out of the house and forcing her to wait outside. What happened inside was only pieced together in the following weeks. Amanda had been shot multiple times, with one bullet severing 2 vertebrae in her upper spine, causing immediate paralysis. Another bullet passed through her heart, taking her life almost instantly. It was clear from the severity of her injuries that this was no accident. Amanda had been targeted with precision, each shot deliberate and calculated. When police arrived at the scene shortly after the shots were fired, they found Amanda unresponsive, lying in a pool of her own blood. She was rushed to Cleveland Clinic South Point Hospital, but despite the best efforts of the medical team, she was pronounced dead. Terrell Edwards was immediately taken into custody. His account of the events was clear. He claimed self-defense. According to him, Amanda had attacked him with a knife during a heated argument, forcing him to shoot her in order to protect himself. But the evidence didn't entirely align with the story. While Amanda's body showed signs of the violent encounter, there were no clear indications that she had posed an immediate threat to him. The police at that time had insufficient evidence to hold him, and he was released without charge. In the days that followed, the decision to release Terrell sparked outrage in the community. Amanda's family and friends were stunned. How could someone claim self-defense after killing the woman they were supposed to love? Was this truly an act of desperation or a calculated act of violence? The community, who had known Amanda as a kind, hard-working woman, demanded justice. They couldn't fathom how Terrell could walk free after ending her life. As the weeks went by, public pressure mounted, and Amanda's family refused to stay silent. The demand for accountability grew louder, fueled by the injustice they felt and the need to protect other women who might find themselves in similar situations. Amanda's loved ones weren't going to let her death be brushed aside. They fought for answers, determined to see justice for a woman whose life was senselessly taken. Finally, in early November 2023, a grand jury indicted Terrell Edwards on charges of aggravated murder, felonious assault, and domestic violence. He turned himself in to authorities on November 3, 2023, after weeks of public outcry. The case was now in the hands of the legal system. But the questions remained. Was this a case of self-defense gone too far? Or was it a tragic example of domestic violence that had escalated to deadly consequences? Should police release suspects without enough evidence? Or should they be held until more facts come to light? The outcry from Amanda Williams' family, friends, and the entire Warrensville Heights community was undeniable. In the days following her death, those who had known Amanda best refused to let her tragic end fade into the background. They spoke out on social media, organized rallies, and demanded justice for the woman they knew and loved. Every corner of the community felt the loss, and the pressure to hold Terrell Edwards accountable grew heavier with each passing day. Amanda's family, especially her daughter Tyler, became the driving force behind this movement. They refused to let the legal system treat her death as just another case that could be dismissed. It was clear to many that the story didn't add up. How could Terrell, a man who claimed to love Amanda, have taken her life so violently? The inconsistencies in his account were glaring. Amanda had been shot multiple times, not once or twice, but 8 times. One shot left her paralyzed. Another pierced her heart. If she had been truly attacking him with a knife as he claimed, why was she shot so many times? Why did her own daughter hear nothing but arguments before the gunshots rang out? These were the questions that echoed in the minds of all who had known Amanda. As public demand for answers intensified, so did the efforts of law enforcement. Investigators scoured the crime scene, spoke to witnesses, and sifted through Terrell's history. They found that his version of events was full of holes. Evidence suggested that Amanda's injuries weren't consistent with a defensive struggle. Rather, they pointed to an execution-style killing. Amanda's family, now fueled by a mix of grief and fury, made sure their voices were heard. Tyler's testimony, in particular, would prove to be pivotal in the case. The young woman vividly recalled hearing the argument and the gunshots, but perhaps most damning was her account of what happened after the shooting. Terrell had locked her out of the house, preventing her from helping her mother, keeping her away from the scene of the crime. The grand jury indictment was a critical turning point. In early November 2023, after weeks of intense scrutiny and mounting pressure, the case finally went to a grand jury. On November 3, 2023, Terrell Edwards was indicted on multiple charges, including aggravated murder, felonious assault, and domestic violence. It was a moment that brought a sense of relief to Amanda's family and her supporters. But it was also a stark reminder that the fight for justice was far from over. Terrell turned himself in shortly after the indictment. For the first time, he was held accountable for his actions. But this was just the beginning. The legal battle was about to unfold in the courts, where the prosecution would have to prove that Terrell Edwards didn't just act as self-defense, but had, in fact, taken Amanda's life with deliberate malice. As the trial approached, prosecutors worked tirelessly to build their case. They gathered more evidence, including the testimony of the Cuyahoga County Deputy Medical Examiner, Dr. Elizabeth Mooney, who explained in excruciating detail the nature of Amanda's injuries. With each piece of evidence, it became clearer that Amanda had been killed in cold blood, not in an act of self-defense. The prosecution painted a picture of a man who had intentionally taken his fiance's life, a man who had used his position of trust to take away the woman he promised to love. Amanda's family held their breath as the trial loomed, hoping that justice would prevail. They had been through so much already, and they knew that this next step was critical. Would the court see the truth? Would Terrell be held accountable for what he had done? Or would the defense manage to convince the jury that it was all just an unfortunate case of self-defense gone wrong? Do you think public pressure helps bring justice in cases like this? The trial of Terrell Edwards began on February 26, 2024, at the Cuyahoga County Court of Common Pleas. What was expected to be a long, grueling process became a fierce battle over the truth, with the lives of Amanda Williams and her family hanging in the balance. The prosecution, determined to seek justice for Amanda, argued that this was not a case of self-defense. It was cold-blooded murder. From the very beginning, the prosecution painted a clear picture of a man who had intentionally taken the life of the woman he had promised to love. They argued that Terrell Edwards didn't act in the heat of the moment or out of fear for his own life. Instead, they suggested that his actions were deliberate, methodical, and born of malice. The prosecution's opening statement outlined the facts of the case in stark terms. Amanda had been shot 8 times. One of the bullets severed 2 vertebrae in her upper spinal column, instantly paralyzing her from the waist down. Another bullet passed through her heart, which, according to the medical examiner, was the fatal shot. The prosecution emphasized that no one could claim self-defense when faced with such a vicious attack. This wasn't a man defending himself against an immediate threat. This was a man who had taken Amanda's life in a premeditated act of violence. As the trial unfolded, the prosecution brought forward key witnesses, each of whom offered a glimpse into the tragic night of October 9, 2023. First, they called Tyler Williams, Amanda's adult daughter, to the stand. Tyler's testimony was both heart-wrenching and damning. Her voice shook as she recalled hearing the argument between her mother and Terrell. She described how she had been in her room when the shouting began and how she had rushed toward the bedroom after hearing the gunshots. Tyler's eyes welled with tears as she recalled how Terrell had blocked her from entering the room. He didn't just stop her. He locked her out of the house, preventing her from helping her mother in what would turn out to be her final moments. In Tyler's mind, Terrell's actions were a clear indication that this wasn't a moment of self-defense. If Amanda had truly been attacking him, why would he have kept her daughter from coming to her aid? Why lock her out of the house? The medical examiner's testimony was the next devastating blow to Terrell's defense. Dr. Elizabeth Mooney explained in chilling detail the extent of Amanda's injuries. 8 gunshot wounds, each one significant. The bullet that severed her spinal cord left her paralyzed, unable to defend herself, and the fatal shot through her heart had been fired at close range. Dr. Mooney's testimony left little doubt about the violence of the attack. This wasn't a case of self-defense. It was a deliberate, calculated murder. Then came the defense. Terrell's lawyers tried to build a narrative of self-defense, claiming that Amanda had attacked Terrell with a knife during a heated argument. They painted Amanda as the aggressor, alleging that Terrell, fearing for his life, had no choice but to shoot her. But there were serious holes in this defense. First and foremost, the physical evidence didn't support the claim that Amanda had been wielding a knife. No knife was found at the scene, and the police could find no evidence that Amanda had made any move toward Terrell that would justify such a violent response. Furthermore, the medical examiner's testimony suggested that the positioning of the gunshot wounds was inconsistent with the defense's narrative. The defense's claim also fell apart when it came to the number of shots fired. 8 shots. The defense would have the jury believe that Terrell, in a moment of panic and fear, fired 8 times at a woman he claimed was attacking him with a knife. But that didn't add up. If this was truly a case of self-defense, why not shoot to stop her, not to kill her? And why, after the first few shots, would he continue firing, even after Amanda had been incapacitated? The prosecution seized on these inconsistencies, highlighting the fact that Terrell had acted with intentionality. He hadn't just been defending himself. He had killed Amanda in a brutal, overkill manner. The question wasn't whether he had been in danger. It was whether he had any right to take her life in such a violent way. As the trial progressed, it became clear that the defense was struggling to convince the jury. The idea that Terrell had acted in self-defense in the face of 8 shots, one of which was fatal, simply didn't hold up. The prosecution's case, bolstered by Tyler's emotional testimony and the forensic evidence, painted a picture of a man who had coldly taken Amanda's life. Does self-defense hold up when someone is shot 8 times? What do you think? After days of intense arguments and emotional testimony, the jury began their deliberations. Tension filled the courtroom as Amanda's family and supporters waited anxiously for the decision that would finally bring them some sense of justice. The evidence was overwhelming: the gunshot wounds, the lack of a knife, and the fact that Terrell had locked out Amanda's daughter, preventing any chance of help. It seemed impossible that anyone could believe this was a case of self-defense. When the jury returned with their verdict, the courtroom fell silent. Terrell Edwards was found guilty on multiple charges, including 2 counts of murder, 2 counts of felonious assault, and 1 count of domestic violence. However, he was acquitted of aggravated murder, leaving many wondering why the jury had not found him guilty of the highest charge. Judge Stephen Gall's sentencing was swift. He sentenced Terrell to life in prison, with a possibility of parole after 24 years. The family was shaken. While they had hoped for a harsher sentence, they took some comfort in knowing that Terrell would not be walking free for at least 2 decades. But Amanda's family knew that nothing would bring their loved one back. The loss was too great. As they left the courtroom, Amanda's family reflected on the long road ahead. They had fought hard for justice, but the pain of their loss would never fade. They vowed to keep Amanda's memory alive and to continue advocating for victims of domestic violence, hoping that her story would serve as a cautionary tale for others. Life in prison for Terrell Edwards will be far from easy. Ohio's prison system is notorious for its harsh conditions, and those convicted of murder, especially domestic violence-related murders, often face significant challenges. As a convicted murderer, Edwards will likely be placed in a maximum security facility, where he will serve out his sentence surrounded by individuals who have committed similar crimes. The reality of prison life, constant surveillance, violence, and a complete loss of freedom will be a harsh punishment for the life he chose to take. The question on many minds is whether Edwards will ever be released. With the possibility of parole after 24 years, Edwards could potentially walk free in the future, depending on his behavior and the decision of the parole board. However, the brutal nature of his crime and the public outcry surrounding his actions may influence the board's decision. Amanda's family and community are left wondering if such a man should ever be allowed to re-enter society, especially after taking a life so violently. Domestic abuse survivors and advocates argue that individuals like Edwards should not be given the chance to harm another person. The question of parole remains a deeply divisive issue. Should convicted domestic abusers ever be allowed the possibility of release? What do you think? Should convicted domestic abusers ever be given parole? Why or why not? Amanda Williams' life was tragically cut short by the very person she trusted most. Terrell Edwards, despite his claims of self-defense, was convicted of 2 counts of murder, and though he was acquitted of aggravated murder, he now faces life in prison with the possibility of parole after 24 years. Her family's fight for justice was long, but they found some closure, knowing that Edwards will serve time for what he did. But the question lingers: what really happened that night? Was justice truly served? Or is there more to the story than we'll ever know? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. If you want more real crime stories like this, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share.